Hello, everyone. I think we still have some folks joining us, but hello, my name is Kelly McKay, and I'm the manager of Museum Learning at the Museum of Russian Art. Welcome to our program today. We have a virtual conversation with Ruvim and Braude, whose collection forms the basis of our current exhibition, Leningrad Underground, Unofficial Artists of the Soviet Era. Ruvim is going to speak with us for about an hour today, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So to introduce our guest, I'd like to invite our curator, Dr. Maria Zavialova, to take over here.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure and honor today to introduce Ruvim Braude, whose collection we are showing in the museum right now. There are just a few days left of the exhibition, which has been very well received by Minnesotans and the guests of the museum. Ruvim originally comes from Leningrad. He was born and raised there. He also got his bachelor's degree in engineering in the Technological Institute in what was then still Leningrad. Ruvim immigrated from the Soviet Union in 1979. He then worked in tech industry and continued his education. Eventually, he got an MBA from St. Joseph University in Philadelphia, and continued to work for various companies, and one of them was HP. And at the same time, Ruvim was and has probably been dedicating his free time and his full-time thought and passion to collecting the art that he knew from his youth, the art of Leningrad nonconformist artists. And what is remarkable about this collection is that Ruvim, the owner of the collection, met a lot of these artists in person, because collections are formed differently. Sometimes people collect the art of past ages and they've never been able to meet artists or makers. This collection is different, and Ruvim, I heard from him a lot of fascinating stories of his personal meetings with the artists, and just the story of the collection is quite remarkable. And Ruvim, please, I'm happy to give you the floor, and we are looking forward to listening to your fascinating stories.
Masha, thank you for the introduction. First and foremost, I'd like to thank all of you who joined for your interest, and also apologize for my voice. Bad luck. I got a cold, so it got into my larynx, but I'll try to manage, so be patient with me. Kelly, am I have the control?
Yes, you have the controls. You can share now.
Right. You see the head slide, right?
Not yet.
Okay, then maybe I have to share it again. It is shared.
Yes.
Okay. Now you see
Wonderful.
it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so before, when I was asked by Masha to give this presentation after the opening in person at the time, a couple months ago, I had this dilemma: what can I add? How I can add value to the audience? Because TMORA put up an awesome exhibit. Very thoughtful, extremely professional. You're blessed to have probably one of the best curators in Russian art in the country, Masha. So what else can I say? I'm not a professional, I'm a collector. And then I thought maybe it would serve you well if I share, like Masha mentioned, I was blessed that in the course of collecting over 35 more years of this collection, first while I was single on my own, and then my wife joined in this endeavor. I've met some artists. Some of them became my close friends for decades. And I also, while I was in Leningrad, very young man, I was part of, at least as an attendee of some of those clandestine events which occurred there and gave also growth to this movement. So I thought that if I share this with you, that will add to your understanding of this art, which is quite unique, and we'll talk about like a couple of minutes about the uniqueness of that. So for that matter, here's what I suggest we'll do in this hour plus. I'll start with a brief historical context of the Leningrad Underground. Leningrad Underground is one of the, the sort of nomenclature, the name which stuck to this movement. There are several, like Leningrad Nonconformist Art, Gazanevshchina, that's a separate name, Leningrad Non-Official Art, but Leningrad Underground, the name stuck as specific to Leningrad, St. Petersburg art of that movement. I would like to dwell, like I said, a couple of minutes of the uniqueness of the whole movement. That's important, not to confuse it with any other. Then Nevsky Palace of Culture. We'll talk about it. That was the one of the two, or the second allowed exhibit in November of 1975. We'll talk about the Aleph Group, which is sort of a sub movement, or the sub-strain of the movement, which also grew up in Leningrad. And the artists, my personal encounters, their reflection on art, some of them very unconventional or different than they would read, and some recollections which again would sort of add more insights into their art in understanding of the whole movement. And then, of course, conversations. I would, if those items stimulate some of your questions, I would be very happy. So let's start with a brief historical context. The Bolshevik Revolution in October 1917, even though it had all the markings of the nightmare to come, however, it hasn't happened. Those nightmares haven't happened overnight, like something that like overnight after the October 17, and the whole society became closed, and the Stalinism descended. After the bloody civil war and millions dead, that was a relative lull. The Russian avant-garde of 1910s, 1920s flourished. Borders were relatively open, and in fact, a number of Russian scientists, musicians, the artists, figures of culture, started seeing what's coming a little bit late, but still not too late. Like Kandinsky, Chagall, they simply packed up and left already Soviet Russia in 1920s. By 1930, just about 30-31, the country's, the Soviet Union borders were sealed, like literally. So the Iron Curtain descended with the barbed wire, with the whole thing. In the next couple of years, all free cultural institutions, free thought, like intellectual and other societies, all cultural venues not in line with the proletariat directives were shut down. And the atmosphere of fear and suspicion was set for the next 20 plus years. An American historian of the period, of the Stalinism period, Donald Rayfield, expressed it best, I think, in his very good book, which is called Stalin and His Hangman, where Rayfield investigated that period. He said verbatim the following: by 1934, the civic and to a large degree civilized society in the USSR had ceased to exist. It just struck me in this very dry and cold, laconic definition that that's exactly what happened. So the country ostentatiously lived, people went to the movies, the ballet was sort of like, playing in the ballet theaters, people got married, they got together with friends, but on the background of it, like I said, was fear, suspicion, self-censorship, and first hundreds of thousands and then millions of people started getting disappeared. Then happened the following. At the Soviet Writers' Congress in 1934, a new doctrine was formally proclaimed by the writer Maxim Gorky. Maxim Gorky was a celebrated writer, like a mentor to a lot of young proletariat, young communist writers. In fact, he was a good writer, very talented, till like people who are from Leningrad, not only from Leningrad, from the former Soviet Union. We still remember that Gorky was part of program literature in middle and high schools. So Gorky proclaimed at that Congress that the new direction in all aspects of culture should descend on the country, socialist realism. Even though the guidelines were not at the time were not sharply defined, but in practice, in painting, it meant using realist styles to create highly optimistic depictions of the Soviet life. Gorky also proclaimed, and that was fairly significant, quite significant, that art that portrayed a negative view of the state and of the party, of the Communist Party, was to be illegal. And to be illegal in the Soviet Union of that time had a very dire consequences. In this matter, Stalin and Gorky had effectively mobilized the Soviet art as a form of state propaganda. From there on, the socialist realism style, the style of this idealized realistic art, was the official style of the Soviet Russia, basically between 1932 through 1988. The birth of unofficial or non-conformist art in the USSR is considered then from the mid-50s and ended by definition around 1988, when the USSR basically entered into its last stretch of its last breath. It happened like within the next couple of years. And here's about the uniqueness of this art. In my conversations with friends and those art lovers circles, I heard comparisons of this art with the German art of the 1910s and 1920s and 30s. The German expressionism of that period, very wonderful art of Weimar Republic. Incidentally, I think the exhibition of one of them, I visited my last visit to Minneapolis like a month ago. That's in your art institute, a wonderful exhibition. Now, the art, in other words, that was designated by the Nazis as a degenerative art. There are parallels, but not quite. The German artists were prosecuted. A lot of them were murdered in the concentration camps, or if the ones who were lucky were driven out of the country or managed to immigrate to America, to England at the time. Nazi regime lasted, for about 11, 12 years. Whereas Soviet nonconformist art was born out of the total prohibition and brutal, very brutal at that, of any free artistic expression for almost a generation, and continued to develop in the next 40 years after that, after it was born, in what still was less brutal, but still a totalitarian system. Hence, uniqueness of it to me is this: historically unprecedented in the modern era, at least. Suppression of the art bore a new, very powerful art movement. Also, as we go closer to the specifically Leningrad Underground, Leningrad, St. Petersburg Underground art is also unique, for example, from Moscow in the following two things. Was unique at the time. The Moscow strain of nonconformist art was later defined as soc art, from the word socialist art, and the Moscow conceptualist art movements. fully formed, and the nomenclature, this definition formed already by the early 1970s, late 60s, 1970s in Moscow. And essentially it was the purview of Moscow apartments, makeshift basement studios, and that drew chiefly from the socialist reality. It was sarcastic, grotesque, oftentimes with absurd images, mocking precisely the socialist realist style that they were supposed to follow. Well, some of those names you might heard, like some very big names like Komar and Melamid, Oleg Tselkov, Yankelevich, Bulatov. At the same time, in Leningrad, a different strain was developing. And the reason is this: that St. Petersburg, since its creation as Peter the Great supposedly called it window to the West, when Peter the Great laid the foundation to the city in 1703, has naturally had a large tendency towards Europe. It was situated on the uppermost northwestern borders. Even during the Soviet times, probably the only large city, the second largest city, that it took like 6 hours or 7 hours by car to get to Finland, to essentially western state, and has always felt itself to be different from the rest of Russia. And in Soviet times, that actually was no different. And Leningrad, born and bred, like myself, I'm sure Masha can share those sentiments as well. Yeah, that's how we considered ourselves. In that, I like one quote, which maybe will pass on to you the atmosphere of this, those feelings, and how a lot of Leningraders felt. In the words of art historian and curator Ekaterina Andreeva, we always considered ourselves as different, and our city was never a Soviet one. Neither Pavel Filonov nor Malevich, the giants of the Russian avant-garde, were ever considered artists who were serving the Soviet state. Standing on the beach at the Peter and Paul Fortress, surrounded by the Hermitage and other buildings, it was self-evident that none of this contained anything Soviet about it. I would say that's very poetic and even like romantic in a political sense of this. I wouldn't go that far, that Leningrad still was under the paw of the KGB and the secret police and NKVD previously, and the Communist Party apparatus. But I would say 85% that statement is correct. So Leningrad nonconformist artists had a very noticeable influence from the West in the 70s and actually in the 80s, while the Soviet Union still was the Soviet Union with the whole oppression apparatus and such. They opposed, in fact, to Moscow conceptualists, and within which this especially socialist art phenomenon, which, like I mentioned, which drew chiefly from the socialist reality. Because Leningrad's underground art movement can be viewed as participating and striving to participate on a larger international scale, to the extent that like less known sort of snippets of history of this movement, some of them after the Stalin's death and after this during the thaw period, as some intellectuals called it, wistfully and wrongly, they tried to write letters to party officials and Leningrad party bosses, explaining to them that actually they are not anti-Soviet. They just want to, they're not enemies of the regime. They just want to paint just in the manner they like to paint. And they would like, they petition to the authorities to allow them to exhibit. From my standpoint, from what we know now in retrospect, that was a very naive kind of naive move, the naive desires, because as we know that it doesn't really matter that they were not active enemies of the state. Any totalitarian state can exist only if it exerts total control over everything. So that probably they didn't really understand. So the second Now we get to the second difference of and uniqueness of the Leningrad underground, Leningrad nonconformist art, compared even to Moscow, is this. In Leningrad, they began organizing into the groups, coherent groups, earlier than in Moscow. Whereas in Moscow, the first exhibitions, underground exhibitions, were the purview of apartments, public parks. Some of them created sort of like a collectives in the environs of Moscow, so further away, further from the Moscow authorities and the watchful eye of the secret police and police, like Leonozovo, for example. There is even a Leonozovo school under Moscow. That's some kind of like village close to Moscow. Leningrad, since 60s, showed like early attempts to organize and officially exhibit. And for that matter, I'd like to mention just one group which was called Petersburg. They called it Petersburg Group, which kind of like was an interesting move as well, because at the time it was firmly Leningrad, but not Petersburg. And that was formed by about 4 people. One very known name out of this 4, Mikhail Shemyakin, who still lives and paints in Paris. And the first exhibition, in fact, took place as early as in 1964 in the Hermitage Museum, of all places. That was all nice and good in the beginning, but the exhibition lasted just one day, from March 31st and April through April 1st, when the authorities closed it. They hadn't been allowed by the authorities, but it was allowed and approved by the museum executive management and by presumed curators, council or something like that. So the exhibition was closed, and the curator, the general director of the Hermitage, Mikhail Artamonov, was fired, and at that point his career was over. Still, it shows a difference in the city's museum's attitudes towards non-conformist art. In 1960s, things like that would not be conceivable, would be inconceivable in Moscow, for example. Now, so the watershed event, and here I moved one slide. The watershed event came in 1970, actually in 1974, when the first exhibition was allowed in the Palace of Art, Palace of Culture, as they called it in the Soviet Union, in the name of Gaza. It has nothing to do with Gaza today in the Middle East. That was just a name. But at that, and very few people knew about that. But then the year after, in 1975, in November 1975, the exhibition was, let me throw this on the, you're right, that would be easier for you to watch. The exhibition was allowed in Nevsky Palace. And from here, the story of our collection started. I was there, and the passion for this art started also from that particular day. Now, the exhibition lasted for, I believe, 8 or 10 days. And I want to share with you, so you would, maybe get a little bit, I'll try to get into the atmosphere there. That was still the Brezhnev Soviet Union. The oppressive apparatus, the social realism ruled those artists, the non-conformist artists, prosecuted. I mean, they couldn't get a job, definitely not like unofficial painters. And they were not allowed any advertisement about this exhibition. And I found out this by chance. I was a student at the university at the time, was in a lab, and a friend of mine ran into that lab and said, like, drop everything. I mean, things in Leningrad, you wouldn't believe what's going on, and dragged me out. We hopped onto the tramway and got to this place in like someplace in Leningrad. And here we see a line for about a mile, for about a few hours, quietly standing. There are police, like letting people in. for a certain allotted amount of time. Eventually, we walked in, and we were absolutely floored, stunned, shocked. We've never seen in the official exhibition hall anything like this, even close to this. This art, the artists standing there, each one was allocated, like you would see here, like their corner or their booth, as we would call it here. And like I said, militia is around, and plainclothesmen, KGB also. Interesting that they were plainclothesmen, but basically people knew, the spectators and the artists, who they are. And I presume, remembering this, they wanted to be seen. In other words, they were like kind of like standing there, like in a corner, observing the crowd, as if they say, well, we allowed you for now, but, you know, we're kind of watching you. And look at this. And you see how, you know, the quality of the photographs are bad, because they were, I don't think that there were like any professional photographers there. These are all like amateur, you know, people who took pictures because people simply were afraid, probably, to take or to be taken. And look at the faces of, like I said, shock and awe. And I was standing there somewhere there in this crowd, maybe not on that day, with the same face. And here you see the it's probably somebody had at the time, very rare, like color photograph, when the artists after the exhibition got together and took a collective picture. And we could see here some of the artists, if you managed to see the exhibition in TMORA. Here, if you see my cursor, that's the young Alec Rapoport is standing there, and Okun is here. So we see those people. You see on the back, very colorful person. We'll talk about it briefly about this. Yevgeny Rukhin. You see the beard and the huge hair. He was like an iconic figure in Leningrad avant-garde. He was killed by the KGB in 1976. And mysteriously, his studio went up in flames, and him and a friend of his perished in that fire. The investigation stalled, then was sort of canned, and nobody doubted that he was the most outspoken, and he had like contacts with foreigners, and nobody doubted that he was simply killed by the secret police. The Allah group, that also a very interesting phenomenon, basically inherent to, specific to Leningrad Underground, Leningrad Nonconformist art. As some of you know, that the Soviet Union was profoundly anti-Semitic society in ethnic, political, religious sense, and any vestiges of specifically Jewish cultures were exterminated by 1932. In fact, that year is memorable for a number of reasons. And the last of them, the last sort of official, almost pogrom, happened in 1948, when the Mikhails, the great actor of the Jewish theater in Moscow, was killed. And the theater was, all the actors were basically arrested. So since then, any expression of the Jewishness in art were strictly forbidden. So somehow, and that I'm switched to the memories of Alec Rapoport, as he conveyed it, late Alec Rapoport, who died in San Francisco. We'll talk about the artist a little later. As he relayed to me how it happened, he said on that exhibition here in Nevsky, we can notice that for whatever reasons, it was no difference between, I mean, there is a huge camaraderie between all nonconformist artists in Leningrad. It was no difference between Jewish or Kalmyk or Tatar or Ukrainians or Russians there. But he noticed that for whatever reasons, almost all Jewish artists were congregated in one, or sort of laid out, assembled, given their booth in one kind of corner of that exhibition hall, almost all of them. And then Alec had this idea of creating just because of that political sort of like, to throw another challenge to the authorities, to create not a splinter group, but sort of like a sub-strain of this movement, specifically nonconformist Jewish artists. And just to give you, so the idea was born at that exhibition in Nevsky Palace of Culture in 1975. And later, Sasha Gurevich, who you also can see his paintings in TMORA, like the last couple of days, and Evgenia Bezgaus, who is also represented on TMORA exhibition, they later joined to the organizing committee. Just to give you also the atmosphere of that and the impetus to which guided those painters to create that. I'll quote Alec Rappaport as he wrote in his memoirs, "Nonconformism Stays." He also was a good writer. He said the following: in the USSR, to be an artist was very respectable. To be a nonconformist artist was a challenge to the authorities. To declare yourself a Jewish nonconformist artist was a scandalous situation and a dangerous at that. So in November of 1975, the first Aleph exhibition happened in Evgenia Bezgaus, here he is, apartment in Leningrad. And here you see, if you manage to visit the exhibition in TMORA, familiar names, very young, of course, at the time, that's 1975. Here is the Sasha Manusov on the left. Here is Widerman. There is one very beautiful painting of his. Here is young Alec Rappaport. Here is Gurevich. And here is Bezgaus. This is Tanya Kornfeld, who is not represented in our collection. And here is an interesting figure, which we will talk about. Was iconoclastic figure for Leningrad nonconformist art, Alexander Arefiev. He is like an interesting guy. He was older. He was like a mentor to a lot of them. He was not Jewish, but out of solidarity and to throw another protest to the authorities, he simply announced that he is joining that movement, and even took the photograph with them on that clandestine, that was not allowed by authorities, exhibition in Bezgaus' apartment. So also a couple of things interesting from as Alec was relating this to me, that they kept the Aleph painters, Aleph artists, excuse me, tried to keep it secret for main reason, practical reason. They were afraid that if the authorities find out, they would confiscate their works. They could do it, and they did it routinely. The authorities, of course, did find out. And Rappaport and Bezgaus, these two guys, were called to the local police precinct, and the local police chief of that precinct in Leningrad, where Bezgaus lived, tried to give them compelling arguments not to convince them not to hold this exhibition. And one of the arguments, and that's Alec relayed to me many years ago, already in San Francisco, as this police chief said, well, we cannot give a guarantee that there would not be a pogrom, verbatim. So that was not in the Tsarist Russia in somewhere in 1905, but in Leningrad in the Soviet Union in 1975, the police chief actually threatened to those painters. I mean, it sounds maybe a little bit ironic now, but it wasn't funny at the time, threatened with a pogrom if they proceed with this exhibition in the private apartment of this guy. They went ahead anyway. Well, the pogrom hadn't happened. And interestingly, that the exhibition lasted for 8 days. That wasn't really closed or crushed by the authorities. 12 artists were represented, and 112 artworks. And some of them you can even see on this picture behind on this wall. That went okay, but not without the consequences. Out of these 12, 5 of them were fired from their jobs, however modest jobs they had. I mean, they could not obviously work as artists for obvious reasons. They were unofficial artists, and they held some jobs like draftsmen in some small enterprises, or teachers of drawing teachers in kindergartens. So they 5 of them were fired from those jobs. This group had interesting consequences, already good ones, that they existed into the late 80s, into 1986, 87. Some of them did start immigrating to mainly to America, to Israel, some of them to Paris. But as the Soviet Union started sort of falling apart and the borders started gradually opening up, almost all of them, the whole group, was brought to the United States, and Gurevich and Rappaport were there. Rappaport actually was already living in San Francisco, but Gurevich, I think Widerman still were back in Leningrad, and to Kentucky, and under the auspices of Kentucky Human Rights Council, they sponsored this exhibition. And here is in fact, they published this brochure, and here is the names of which you see on your screen of those artists who were there, with actually pretty nice brochure, which they called From Gulag to Glassness, Creativity Under Duress. In fact, they didn't even know that sort of informally, those artists called themselves, they gave themselves a name as a group, Aleph, by the name of the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. But that was the first attempt to break out to into the international scene. Now, to round this up, those first exhibitions in Leningrad, particularly in Leningrad, because in Moscow they were allowed later, were hugely consequential. They first of all gave push to other ethnic and national art groups, of which were many, despite arrests and, as I mentioned, the murder of Evgeny Rukhin in 1976, intimidation, interrogations by the KGB. All of them still went forward, even after the 1976. Only in 1976, in fact, that tragic year, because this incident, the fire and essentially the murder of Rukhin, reverberated through the artist circle, in intellectual circles in Leningrad and Moscow hugely. But only in 1976, 100,000 people visited exhibitions in Leningrad and Moscow. By 1977, 78, when the borders they were not open, but the immigration started kind of like selectively allowed, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them started like immigrating to US, Israel. Some of them settled in Europe, like Arefy, for example. So at this point, let's talk about the artists. I chose them first of all by almost all of them who I knew personally, and that may be interesting to you, or would give you the insight into their perspective and their angle of to understand their art. We may not get to all of them, but at least a few of them, and also by their influence on the movement. So Alexander, or as they gave him, they called him nickname Arefiev. There is another name, less known. They called his school Barak, from the name of Barak, like military or prison barrack. Barak School, or Arefiev Circle, by the name of the artist who associated around him. Arefiev was a little older. He was born in 1931 and died in Paris in 1973. He was a gentle giant. He tried to attend some art schools, was thrown out of all of them because of formalism, as they called it in the Soviet Union, because he always displayed this independent streak and wanted to write and to paint as he wanted. He is on the right. He was a mentor, friend, and a comrade to all those non-conformist artists. In fact, in that you could even see him in that exhibition in Nevsky. He was the one who was not allowed by the authorities, was barred from exhibiting his art because he was like a sore thumb in their eyes. But he showed up just to express the solidarity, and he's still standing there, even though he was not allowed to exhibit. You can even see him on that picture with the artists. His relationships with the authorities invariably would result in scandals, often brawls. He was in prison twice. And in fact, Plask was committed at one point to the mental institution, which was for the authorities. And the Soviet Union was a typical kind of punishment for a dissident. Also, look at this picture. That's him with a Star of David on his neck. And also interesting, you see this. I'm sure that people from from the Soviet Union would recognize the format of the picture. This white kind of oval here. Apparently, this picture was taken when he was allowed to immigrate in 1972. He was basically thrown out of. He was, like I mentioned, he was not Jewish. He joined that alt movement, and because of his scandalous and kind of like bring it on nature to the authorities, he decided to take a photograph for the official exit visa when he was allowed to, with the Star of David. It's like, bring it on. Here you have it. So that's the way he was. On this picture on the left, it's also iconoclastic figure and a mentor. That's Sholem Schwartz. He died very early. He was an older guy. He was like one of the best friends of Arefiev, and you'll see how their art sort of cross-pollinate each other. Now that's the picture of the one artwork from Arefiev Mixed Media that you can see in on the exhibition at TMORA. And remember this barrack, what they call the Arefiev Circle Barrack School of Art. His person, the thing is, and that's one of the reasons why he was such a thumb for the authorities. His person, a real Soviet person, formed by the Stalinism, fear, violence, Stalin's gulag or post-gulag, day-to-day existence, the psychopathic relationships of the life of communal apartments in Leningrad, and the street crime. And this particular is called, which is in our collection, which is very, very dear to us. It's called he painted it in 1955. It's called A Lady and Two Hoodlums, or Lady and Two Thieves. That's kind of like a typical street scene in Leningrad of the 50s, sort of shortly post-Stalin, after Stalin's death. And hence Barak School name. And by the way, Arefiev's idol was from the old masters was Francisco Goya. That's kind of now. You remember that that his friend on the left, Sholem Schwartz, and mentor, and that's just for comparison. That Schwartz graph of the 1950s, like Schwartz died very early, or this, and you could see the some similarities with that style of Arefiev, and you could see this Schwartz's man's head. Definitely not what it's not a Soviet idealistic figure, not how the Soviets wanted to see their citizens painted. Alec Rapoport. I'll try to make it short because a lot of things we can talk about. Alec, let me tell you how we met. Which kind of was interesting. I believe in 1903 or something. I was already living in San Francisco a few years, because my first 5.5 years I spent in New York and around New York. And in 93, I was already working for HP, for tech in Silicon Valley, and not married yet. Some distant relative of mine asked me to give shelter for a week to his relative in Israel. This guy came, I didn't know who he was, and instead of a week, he started living another week, and the third week, and the fourth week, and whatever. Okay, I was single, I went to work, he went, David, his name was, he went like enjoying himself and walking around San Francisco. At one point, he came home and he said, listen, and he was the guy who talked to everybody. He said, listen, I met like a wonderful, genteel couple in a metro, in San Francisco metro today. They spoke Russian, and I started speaking with them. And I invited them for dinner. I said, oh, really? Yeah, it's not enough that you like living in my house indefinitely. Then you're meeting somebody on the street and you're inviting them for dinner to my house. Okay. And he said that his name is Alec Rapoport, and he's an artist. And then I stopped. Said, whoa. Alec Rapoport, an artist. Are you sure? At that point, I didn't trust anything he was saying. He was telling me. I said, yeah. He said he's not. And obviously, Alec Rapoport was one of the names. I even remember what he looked like. And that memorable exhibition in Nevsky, 1975, in November 1975. So I said, yeah, that at least you did something good. So they came. It indeed was Alec Rapoport. They came with his wife, who is still alive, very ill and in advanced age, lives in outskirts of Sacramento in California, Irina Rapoport. And since then, interesting, I didn't even know that Alec Rapoport with his wife immigrated relatively early in 1977 and lived in San Francisco. I didn't know that. That's how I found out, by sheer chance. We became friends and engaged in long conversations. I learned from him as a beginner collector at the time about arts, and of course his life, and about the whole movement. It was before he wrote a book about it. Alec was born also in 1931, in fact in Ukraine, Kharkov, and died actually in 33 in Kharkov, and died in San Francisco in 97. He actually was, his wife found him one morning in this modest home in San Francisco, in his studio in the basement, sitting on the chair, dead, in front of unfinished work. So he died as he lived. So his family, in fact, also, I think important to understand, was like very typical family of that Stalinist period. His father was arrested and died in the Gulag camps. His mother was also arrested but survived, came back after 10 years. And he was accepted to the art academy in Leningrad, got expelled for started experimenting with certain art movements not approved, got drafted to the army the Soviet army for 3 years in 1958, and returned to graduate. In 1960, he turned to Jewish themes in a very particular manner, because Alec, like almost the majority of the Soviet Jews, was not only not religious, but didn't know anything about the traditions, or his parents were like in the Gulag. So he returned to that out of interest to the biblical characters, and out of the protests, like a lot of them against the official anti-Semitism. So that is a very interesting work, beautiful work in our collection, which is also a collection in an exhibition at TMORA. You see the Alec Rapoport, which he painted still in the academy as a very young, almost teenager, with a skull cap on his head, a kippah. He never wore a kippah. He probably only recently before that found out what it was, but he basically just that move again, this addition to this very academically painted, executed portrait, already represented certain degree of protests. That's how he wanted to express himself. That's his drawing from the Soviet army. And he served far in the Far East, in some godforsaken place. You see, that's in the foreground him, and that's his fellow soldiers in that army. That's also on display, and that's part of our collection. He painted this in 1955. Then he turned to the Judeo-Christian tradition, like, for example, this mixed media work on the evangelical subject. That's I think it should be translated from New Testament as a disbelief of Thomas, and this one is like Judean prophets. So that's what Alex Forte was. That is a very dear painting to us, and there's another one in the 80s in San Francisco. Alec turned experimenting with views, San Francisco sceneries, sort of skewed figures, blue sky. He was infatuated with San Francisco. And that was the period when Alec was genuinely happy. And he painted those subjects. One thing I wanted to pass on to you, which is probably important, from one of our conversations, I remember that I came from a business trip in New York one time and visited Alec, and we talked about a lot of things. And when I was in New York, I always, visit some museums there. And in maybe some of you remember, like in Museum of Modern Art in New York, there is a very famous painting. I forgot who was I think it's Divincorn or something. The white background and vertical line, so black line. So I came and I said, Alec, very humbly, I started like, I really don't understand what this painting means, and I was afraid that he would react like in a very lofty manner. So, well, if you don't understand it, I have nothing to talk to you about. But interestingly, he listened and he said, I don't understand it either, which gave me more courage. But he didn't poo-poo it. He said, there are different criteria in art, and one of them is the innovation in art. Before him, nobody did that. Nobody had done it, and he had. And that's how it became a nomenclature in this genre, in this art, which to me was kind of like an interesting view. Alexander Sasha Gurevich, that is my close friend, and one of my favorite, or maybe the favorite artists. He was, I met him in, I think, 1990, my second visit to then the Soviet Union, then to Leningrad, and someone brought me to his studio. I remembered him also from Nevsky Palace of Culture in 1975, and I jumped at the opportunity to meet him and immediately bought a couple of his paintings from his studio in Leningrad. It was a separate story how I managed to carry them through, though officially Gurevich held, and they had a stamp of Ministry of Culture that they were allowed to bring out of the Soviet Union. Nonetheless, they gave me tremendous grief at the customs when I was leaving on Lufthansa back home. And we became friends for many, many years. You could see that, in fact, our wedding present 29 years ago from Gurevich, when he visited, when we brought him to San Francisco in 1994 for his exhibition and the visit. That's Judith, and you could see there are so many details there. The last days, I would suggest you would take a look at this painting. That's kind of like, it's still 1989, 1990 paintings. You could see the legacy of this non-conformist underground art. That's a whimsical St. Petersburg, whimsical Leningrad, and the Judith in the center figure with the head of Olofern. And Olofern, very obvious, the figure of Lenin, and she's holding the figure of Lenin. This fragile Judith still managed to slay the Olofern in the sort of Lenin's euphemistic expression. That's also with his Leningrad Underground compadres, also very sarcastic, because one of their job was to paint, just to make some money, to paint a propaganda posters. And that's what, in fact, on the right is late Valentin Gerasimenko, one of his painting also in display in TMORA. That was Gurevich, a close friend. His artistic vision was different. It was a confluence of old and new. So it was a fusion of long past and today as one unit, seeing today through the prism of the past. He was and he is, thank God he's still painting, he's alive in Israel. He is an exquisite study of the old painters. And you see, for example, this one, which is on display, that's called the Conjurer. And this one, the original Conjurer of Bosk, I believe it's in the Louvre. Masha probably can help me out. And that's how the Gurevich, it's not a copy, obviously, but that's how this grotesque Bosk, that's how Gurevich sees it. And by the way, in the light of, I have to tell you one thing, which is kind of interesting and to some extent very sad. All of us know what is happening in Israel right now. Gurevich immigrated in 1993 to Israel from St. Petersburg, and he was known there, and he was granted by the Artist Union, granted a studio in Jerusalem where he lives, the studio in historical Ein Kerem neighborhood. And the studio is a bomb shelter. In fact, if you Google, there are, amongst other articles about Gurevich, there is one of the pieces called The Art from the Bomb Shelter. And it's a real bomb shelter, underground with the metal doors. One condition was that in case of war, he has to get out of there with all his belongings within 12 hours. And that happened the first time in 30 years. That actually happened a week ago. We talked, and his wife and some of his friends would descend on his studio and work there overnight. And now all his, for 30 years, the easels, the materials, unfinished works, finished works, everything is stacked in their apartment or with their friends. And at this point, he just doesn't know what's going to happen. Well, hopefully he'll return back to his studio. That's what he is doing today. Nowadays, you see also sort of like correspondence with talking to the old masters like Bruegel older here, or Susanna and elders, the biblical subject. And the last thing, I know that we are at the end of the hour. The last thing I still would like to talk about Evgeny Ukhnalev, Zhenya Ukhnalev, dearest friend of ours. He never left St. Petersburg. He died in 2015 in Leningrad. Also was born in 1931. Zhenya, that was his like abbreviated name, Evgeny, was born into a, I would say, noble Russian intelligentsia family in Leningrad. Was arrested in 1948 when he was 17, 18 years old, and given 25 years of hard labor. He did 7 years and was amnestied in 1957. He was lucky because Stalin died in a few years after he was arrested and sentenced. He still didn't know why, like millions of other people. He drew there. And by the way, that's, you see that he was just shortly before the arrest, and that's 7 years after. That's his photograph on his parole paper. And you could see the difference after 7 years. He drew he was sent to the one of the Gulag Vorkuta on extreme north camps, and he drew there. You could see this is the barracks, prisoners' barracks, and what you see here is the snow piled up to the roof, and basically blocking all the windows. And that's obviously the guard tower. Interesting. He returned. He started working. He was one of those who actually worked as a painter. He was the chief architect in the Hermitage Museum. And here's he during the perestroika with Yeltsin, where he was given in the Kremlin the official title of the People's Artist of Russia in 1997. That's the highest honor there. He also was assigned as a director for design project of new symbolics of Russia, like new orders, instead of hammer and sickle, something else. That's him not, already not long before his death. And then I took this picture the last time I was in Leningrad, which was 11 years ago in 2012, when we took our son to see where his papa grew up, our son who was born and bred San Franciscan. And that's him and his wife in 2012 in their apartment in Leningrad. And they died, basically, Natasha and him, basically months of each other. Look behind him. You see this cupboard, this old-fashioned, probably came from his parents. And that's the painting, which he sort of brought his nostalgia for the old things and for things, as he called it, which you can also see in this collection. That's the cover, not exactly a copy, but under the influence of that, his own chest in their apartment. And that, of course, and that's the last thing what I want to say, and we'll get to the questions. That's I think, one of the best in our collection, what we have. Ukhnalov painted it in, I believe, 2001, I think, or 2000, and didn't want to sell it for a long time. And eventually he did sell it to us. That is, you see, it's a triptych, and there are three parts to it, but they represent one railroad car, the cattle car. On the left, you could see some old Russia Tsarist heraldic there, the two-headed eagle, the burned, broken car, and the fire, the smoke. That represented the Civil War, the atrocities of the revolution and the Civil War. In the middle, you could see the swastika, and here he put Nur for Juden in German, for Jews only, the empty railroad car, and the talit, the prayer shawl for the Jews just remaining there. And here is obviously Auschwitz chimney and the smoke. And on the right, you see already the Soviet heraldic there, the Soviet symbols, the hammer and sickle, and some kind of numbers there. And here the word Rechlag, some markings of a camp that represents Gulag. Interesting. At one point, almost giggling, like he had a very good sense of humor. Said, "You see this number 18712? That's a number which could be on any Russian trains." And he said that nobody knows what it is. That actually was my number at the Vorkuta camp. So he and the whole thing, if you look closer at the original, performed meticulously every stone, every board, every piece of smoke, element of smoke. So Ukhnalov represented in the triptych the whole pain, horror, murder, atrocities of the 20th century in one car. We'll probably don't have time for such a amount of stuff. So at that point, I thank you, and please ask me anything you'd like to ask.
Thank you so much, Ruvim. So for our audience here, if you have questions, please type them in the chat. That's the best way to share questions with us. But in the meantime, as we're waiting for folks to submit their questions, you're welcome to continue with Manasov if you'd like, Ruvim.
Oh.
I don't want you to have to leave out an artist.
No. I'd love to.
Okay.
This is Sasha Manasov, also part of the Aleph group and the larger nonconformist group of artists. He died very early, I think 40. Well, he died in 1990 and was born in 47. Was born in Omsk, in whether it's Ural or Siberia, in evacuation, essentially after the war. The parents returned back to Leningrad. Why it's significant to me, this painting, which is also on display, was our first oil in our collection. I got it from a Russian art dealer in San Francisco. I didn't know painters at the time. I didn't know who Sasha Manosov was dead by then. I think that was his one of maybe the last painting he's done, and it's called Shabbat. Sasha Manosov again was one of those paintings. He was Jewish, but he didn't know much about Judaism, was not practicing, typical Soviet Jewish family. But you see how Shabbat is sort of like a clandestine affair with those shadows on the faces and two candles, and people still this danger is in the air. Some of people, when I spoke with his widow, Regina Manosova, who lives in Indiana right now with their daughter, she said that a lot of people consider that that he sort of had a premonition that he would not be alive for a long time. He had a heart condition, even had a surgery in Germany before that. So also he was if you look at the painting, he was considered even by his and you know the artists are very sometimes very jealous folks and very strict to each other. He was considered by his compadres, by his artists, the biggest colorist, the biggest master of color of all that movement. And you see behind him this tree and the people. In fact, I have on my shelf somewhere, right, Regina Manosova wrote a very substantial memoirs about that period. It's called, she wrote this in Russian. Unfortunately, it was not translated. Синее дерево. In Russian, it's called the blue tree, or navy probably, the tree of navy color. That she wrote about him, about the color, and you could see the color. So for Manosov, and talking about the colors, his idols and basically his spiritual and artistic mentors, euphemistically saying, were Filonov, Cézanne, and Falk, and that I know from his widow. Okay, so Kelly, would you like to drive the questions?
Sure. So we have a question that is something that I know our museum guides are definitely would be very interested to know too. But the question is, can you help us understand Alexander Gurevich's painting, Pushkin, Let's Go Swimming?
Oh, yes. And can you give me a sec? I probably can, for people to understand that, I can probably share it.
Oh,
right?
if you have it, that's great.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, hold on. Yeah, that maybe I could. Just give me a sec.
Sure. And while you're doing that, I'll just mention that for participants, if you are asking a question, it will go straight to the hosts and the panelists. You won't be sharing it with the rest of the group. So it'll go straight to us, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, hold on.
And this is an artwork that's in the Fireside Gallery in the museum.
Right. But I somehow lost your screen.
Yes, it's a challenge with all the windows open.
You know, with a lot of windows, so you're right. You're right. So, oh yeah, here it is. Here it is.
Okay.
Let me try to shoot. Yeah. That's the painting you're referring to, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's an absolutely amazing figure, which he painted still in Leningrad. You see, 1990. And I'm thinking how to do it briefly. Gurevich's style is this: every square centimeter of his painting means something. Sometimes it is even he is bristling at when he's asking to explain, because a lot of painting they paint, they do not talk. They can't explain it. But essentially, it is a very nostalgic figure. At the time, he probably in 1990, he knew that eventually he would be immigrating, would be leaving Leningrad, St. Petersburg. And on the right, you could see the figure of Pushkin, who probably the most in a poetic sense of all, describing in his poetry St. Petersburg. And on the top, see on the very top in the center, 45 Kaznacheyskaya Street. That's where that's a very nostalgic old St. Petersburg neighborhood, so like an old town, and that's where the Gurevich studio on the attic of one of those buildings was. Here you see the very typical to Leningrad, St. Petersburg architecture. I heard, and Masha probably would correct me if I'm wrong, you won't find it in any other city, the pig iron railings over the canals in Leningrad, this kind of like oval thing. So they became almost like an emblematic of Leningrad, like, you know, some iconoclastic bridges in Paris, emblematic of Paris. And that most likely is Fontanka, the river, or one of the canals. And that's what Pushkin, Let's Go Swimming. It's a very grotesque kind of thing. I believe that this figure, one of those figures, is one of Pushkin's imaginary friends, maybe Pushkin, maybe somebody else. So the whole thing, and like we can talk in length what's on the bottom plane. Like I said, for Gurevich, every single, I mean, this, you see this very exquisite light, which yellow light from this cheap electrical bulb, which is normally was hanging somewhere in the communal apartments in a corridor. Nobody would replace them. Every single square inch means something. But in general, that's a very nostalgic St. Petersburg painting with Pushkin in the premonition of Gurevich that he probably would have to leave his studio and his city.
Great, thank you. If there are follow-up questions to that, you can do that in the chat. We have another question.
Or you can send me directly the email.
Lovely.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question from one of our wonderful museum volunteers. She mentions that this is one of her favorite exhibitions ever at the museum. And would you mind speaking a little bit more about your journey as a collector, and maybe what else is part of your collection? What are your principles and values when you're collecting?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for the question. Secondly, all the credits go to TMORA, to the museum for, first of all, reaching out to me for TMORA's and the staff, Masha, for their vision to set up this exhibition. Let me ask you a question. Now, the first thing, what I wanted to say that was maybe counterintuitive, I didn't come from the family of art collectors. I loved art. In fact, I remember the first time when I was brought to the Hermitage Museum by my father. I was, I believe, like 6 or 7 years old, and after that, we would go with him on Sunday, like every once in a while. So I don't even remember how many times I had been to Hermitage as a youngster. But that said, you know, I was born into a fairly unusual family in Leningrad. My grandfather, on my mother's side, hence the different last name, was the chief rabbi of Leningrad for 33 years, well, minus 2 prison terms. You know, he died when I was basically a teenager, well, a little bit even older than a teenager. He died in 1973. And we lived together. So I actually was my 6 years of my life, I lived in the walls of the Leningrad synagogue, because that's where my grandparents had an apartment. Then we moved to another part of the city. So we obviously, because of my grandfather's situation and position, we had connections with the dissident circles of Leningrad, but art was not one of them. We had other problems. So I knew on my own, I knew the underground artists in Leningrad, but it was more like a social kind of thing. It was more like a dissident camaraderie. You know what I mean? Yeah, I wasn't their studios, but that's as far as it went. Never occurred to me to buy something. It's like, well, first of all, we didn't have the place in our apartment to hang any artworks, and I didn't have the money. So 1975, like I mentioned, 1975, that fateful to me and for the artist, as it turned out to be, and for the whole movement, exhibition in Nevsky Palace of Culture. That was the absolutely turning point when, like I said, I was shocked, I was floored. And at the time, it was almost like a forbidden thought, well, maybe someday I would own something. Then what happened, like a few years after, a couple of years after that, I managed to immigrate. And I settled in New York first, and I saw like very small advertisement in local newspaper that in some Reform synagogue in New Jersey, there is an exhibition of Evgeny Abesgaus. And Evgeny Abesgaus died in Israel about, I think, 5 years ago. And I said, whoa, that was one of the he was very colorful picture even on that exhibition with a big beard, with this name tag in Nevsky Palace. So I jumped in the car and went there. I was the only one person in that exhibition. It was basically in the hallways of synagogue, and it was a sale. And I bought my first artwork. It was a print, which is also on display in this collection in TMORA, in exhibition at TMORA, of Abesgaus. So that was the beginning of my collection. I hang it in my little apartment in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where I lived at the time by New York. You know how it is. I got the collector's bug, and because I grew up with a very strong dissident tendencies. To me, that the whole background of something, including the art or the of a writer or a poet with political connotation, political background, is important. And I started collecting because I'm a Leningrader by birth and upbringing. And I was sort of, as a spectator, a little bit part of that movement. I started collecting or tried to collect. I never thought of myself as a collector, those paintings. Then one thing led to the other. I bought the first, like I mentioned to you, Manosov, that Shabbat painting from just a Russian art dealer in San Francisco, 1989, I think. I met, because I was one of the collectors, I met his widow when she came with her daughter to San Francisco. They stayed in my house at the time. They didn't have the place to stay for some time. She introduced me when I came to Leningrad a year after, the first time, introduced me to Gurevich, started getting to know them. And one thing, then, like I told you how I by chance met Rappaport, one thing led to the other. And then I became already full-fledged collector. It became part of my life. Specifically, in that particular genre, and specifically Leningrad nonconformist art. So somehow for this 35, I have Moscow artists like Rabin, for example, 2 paintings. I have something else, but basically 99% of our collection is the Leningrad Underground. If it answers your questions, but thanks for the question. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So we have no other questions from our audience right now. So I think this is a great place to wrap up, unless Masha has any final questions.
Well, I have a comment and a thank you to Ruvim, because I find his stories and the way he talks about this art is really very, I would say, eye-opening even for me, because he talks from the point of view of a participant and a collector. And I'm very glad we recorded this presentation, that we can put it on our website, and we will keep it for our future museum guides and similar events and exhibitions, probably as a piece of information that's really very valuable to us. And sometimes Ruvim, you put things in such a way that makes them very fresh and very striking to me, because there have been books written about nonconformist art, and we had these exhibitions, but yeah, for example, when Ruvim said that he was part of the dissident movement as a viewer, and not as like making art, but looking at it, which was a very important role actually at that time, because it was a close-knit circle of people. It was not like broad public, and those who visited these exhibitions were as important as the people who made art, because they created this, the space of communication and sharing. And then he also added that for him, as a participant of that time, of that era, the art that's meaningful would be political, or would have some kind of political connotations, which sometimes people tend to disregard or look down upon political art, saying, oh, it's just political. While no, it's really, especially for those times and those places, art should be political and openly political, probably. Thank you so much.
Masha, thank you for your kind word. And again, I can't thank TMORA and your staff enough for letting us, my wife and I, to share the collection. And the very last thing, I know if somebody has a burning question but didn't have the time to ask, I know how frustrating it may be. Kelly, you may send to the participants my email. I don't mind, and please ask me whatever you wanted to ask and didn't have the chance to ask.
Thank you. That's very, very kind. It's very generous of you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate your having your singular perspective, and I appreciate our audience members for being here as well. And thank you so much.
Thank you.